We're now going to look at the multi-section. We first looked at the single section binding, but there's obviously a limit to how many pages you can put into a book using this method. So how to put more pages in. The multi-section. So you can see here there's 5 sections all joined, one on top of the other to the other to the other. Obviously you can keep going and going and going forever. This is called an unsupported French link stitch, and for me it's one of the easiest way to join sections together. And we'll also make a hardcover to go on top of it with some Endpapers as well. So we'll look at 3 different bindings for the multi-section. This is the hardback, so like a sketchbook. And we'll also look at the OTA binding and the Swiss binding. So the first thing you need to do is take these sheets of white A4 paper and we're going to fold them in half. So that's the short edge to short edge, marrying up those corners. Can't see anything. Use your finger to crease it. Use your bone folder to sharpen that crease. So we're going to repeat that for all the sheets of paper. Okay, so we now have all the sheets of paper folded. You need to open up one of them and then insert the next one inside, open that up and repeat until you have them all one inside the other. So we have our pile of folded sections and we've obviously gone through and checked that they're all the right way up and in the correct order. This is a blank book, so it doesn't matter, but if it was printed, it obviously would be of vital importance. If you've double and triple checked that everything is in the right order, you can put a diagonal line up the back of the sections. You can see here. And then you will know that if one of them is the wrong way around or in the wrong order, you have a visual marker of that it is incorrect. But because this is a blank book, we're not too worried. Well, we're not worried at all. So the next thing is we're going to make up a sewing template. I'm going to assume this is my head and this is my tail. Again, it's a blank book, so it doesn't matter too much. I'm lining up the edge of my sewing template with the head, and I'm making a mark at the tail of the whole page. This is not worrying about the trim at this point. If I had the trim marked on here by a printer who wanted a specific size, I would have to take that into account as well. I would have to mark that on my sewing template and then create the kettle stitches within that trim. But for this book, we're not going to worry about that. So on my sewing template, I have my head in line with the top of the piece of paper and my tail at the end of the sheets of paper. I'm then going to mark 15mm in from the head and 15mm in from the tail. These are my kettle stitches. I'll talk about those a little more in a minute. And then between the kettle stitches, we want 2 sewing stations. In order to create an equal space, these 3 equal spaces, we need to divide this space, happily 18 centimetres, by 3, gives me 6 centimetres. So I'm going to mark at 6 and at 12, and then there's 18. So now I need to create 2 holes either side of those 2 marks. So traditionally, one would have sewn on tapes like this, and they're about 15mm wide. So I tend to set my dividers at 15mm, just over. If you don't have dividers, you can use a ruler or you can use a finger. So I have my mark here. I'm setting my dividers equally either side of it. And here. And that is going to be my sewing stations. It's worth rubbing out these middle marks. It would help if I had a better rubber. But that's now giving you 6 holes to make, so a pair of kettles and 2 pairs of sewing stations. So we now have our pile of sections and our sewing template. I like to ensure that I always get them in the correct order, so I set up a rhythm. I get the top section, this is tail and this is head. I flip it over, then this becomes head. It's still obviously the head, but it's just where the head is now. I put in my sewing template, matching up head with head. A lot of this explanation is a little over the top for a blank notebook, but it's important to understand for when you come to using sewing printed material. So I place my sewing template into the fold, matching up the head with the top of the page. I place my awl up to the mark. I bring the page over on itself and I push through. A lot of people like to use a punching cradle or pricking cradle, but personally I find that is one piece of kit too many. Keeping it simple. So we've now made all our holes and they line up perfectly down the backs of the spines, and we've got our diagonal line across the back, so we know that all our sections are in the correct order. So the next stage is sewing them together. We're now going to sew the sections. I've got an arm span of thread that I'm going to wax. And take a needle. I've slightly squashed the end of the thread with my teeth, thread the needle. Now there's a cunning trick for keeping the needle on the thread so that when you're sewing it doesn't come unthreaded and you have to start all over again. You take the short tail of the thread, you wrap it tightly around your finger, you pierce through the centre of the thread, you then draw the thread down the shaft of the needle and down onto the long tail, and then you pull the long tail tight and it will tighten the thread at the eye of the needle without any knot. So I take a pressing board and I place it on the edge of my bench. I take the first section, I flip it over, I open it up, the spine edge of it to the edge of the board. I place a weight inside it and I'm going to start sewing from one end. It doesn't matter which end, from the outside going in. So pull it all the way through and leave a bit of a tail, 2 or 3 inches. Be careful not to pull the tail all the way through. Okay, pull your sewing tight. Pull in that direction, not against the paper, or you can tear the paper. So close up the section. Section 2, flip it over, open it up, line it up, put the weight in. Now we're going to go up through the hole above in section 2 and then come out, and now we need to form a link stitch. So you've come out of this hole, you take the needle up through the stitch on the section below, and then you go back in the section 2. So I'm coming out again. The needle goes up behind the stitch, like that, and back in. You can see there's a little twist being created here. So we've got to the end of section 2. We need to join section 2 to section 1. And to do that, we're going to tie a knot with these 2 threads. But first, we need to pull up the tension. So you can see here, the sewing is quite loose. I've closed the section, I've put a weight on top, I'm putting pressure on the sections, and I'm just pulling up the tension from here. And I'm then going to pull up from this thread at the end. You can see it tighten there. And there, and then we're going to tie a double knot, a reef knot. So right over left and left over right. This spare tail, you're just going to tuck him in between those sections so that he's out of the way. So next we're going to move on to section 3. You take section 3, you flip it over, you open it up, you put the weight in. So section 3, I'm going to go up into the hole above. Now we need to link this one to the stitch below. So you can see where the twist is formed. I need to create the link before the twist. I'm traveling in this direction. I take my needle and I take it behind this thread, like so. You can see it's before the twist. And then back in through the hole. So again, I take the thread, or rather the needle, sorry, I take it, it's just going behind the single thread that's of section 2, and it's going before the twist. So we've got to the end, we need to join section 3 to section 2. I'm going to close up my section and put the weight on top. I'm going to pull up any tension, any loose threads here. So you can see the slack there. I'm going to pull that up. And now we form the kettle stitch. Kettle is from the German 𝗖𝗿𝗱𝗏𝗀𝗏, to join together. I take my thread, my needle, I pass it behind the stitch that connects section 1 and 2, and I take it so it's going out that way. Pull it through to form a loop. Again, it's worth pulling up the tension and placing your finger on that so it doesn't fall back. The needle then goes up through the loop and tighten to lock. Don't make your kettles too tight, otherwise it will be too tight at either end of the book and it will look like a banana. Okay, so now section 4, pick it up, flip it over, open it up, line it up, weight in. You can see that we're now getting into a nice rhythm. Sewing can be one of the most meditative parts of the process. So in here, you're forming the link with the stitch, the single piece of thread. So I'm taking the needle behind the single thread and I'm going in this direction, so I'm forming it before the loop that's on the one below. And you'll see you'll end up with a nice zigzag sort of herringbone pattern going up the back of the book. When you get to the end, your final section, and you've sewn all your sections, you do a kettle as normal, and then you do a second kettle in the sections, between the two sections underneath. And that's it. Trim it off. And you're ready to glue up. We now need to tip on our end paper. So very similar to what we did with the single section. The grain direction is running up and down, parallel to the spine. Fold your sheets in half, crease them. You have a waste sheet on the bench, the folded edge of the end paper on top, the second folded edge about 5mm below, the second waste sheet, a nice straight folded edge, and you're going to brush on glue in an outwards direction. Remove the waste sheet. Pick up the top end paper and pitch it onto your book, lining it up with the spine. Use your bone folder to rub it down. Flip over and repeat on the other side. Obviously rub out any pencil marks like that before. I have the sections at the edge of the boards, and I have the boards at the edge of the press. I'm not closing it tight, I'm just putting a gentle pressure on it. And I'm then going to glue up all the way along the spine. So because I'm not rounding and backing this book, it's a flat back book, I'm going to glue up all along the spine, going over the stitching as well. And the two little tails, you can just tuck them in into the grooves of the sections, the back of the sections. So leave that to dry, and then we'll trim it in the guillotine.